Konstantin Kisin grew up in Soviet Russia and moved here aged 11. He's a commentator, writer, co-host of the free speech podcast TRIGGERnometry and identifies as a politically non-binary satirist.
With the Ukrainian President Zelensky praising Donald Trump and a ceasefire now on the horizon, is there a method to Trump's madness?
What do you think?
I think the war's been going on for years. We had a previous American president who did nothing about it. Europe's been sleeping. In fact, I think this week they've even been talking about conscription and people like me may eventually have to go to war.
I mean, just to be clear, Keir Starmer has not talked about it.
Keir Starmer hasn't, but as European, I use him
Poland
collectively,
has, I think.
yeah. And I personally think he's been in charge for 2 months. He's got Zelensky to agree to a ceasefire proposal. I believe his team is in Russia now to potentially get Putin to agree to one. He's done more in 2 months, and he's moving at a rate that's so fast that you guys can't keep up. And I do believe there is a method to his madness. I don't agree with everything he does, but I care about results. And I think everyone in this room wants to see young Ukrainian soldiers and Russian soldiers not dying.
OK. Konstantin.
Well, a few things to say. On my way here, I was watching the press conference that Vladimir Putin was giving in Russian. I think we ought not to get too carried away. Yeah. This is a very early first step. The way Vladimir Putin's responded is just enough, not so that people couldn't blame him for rejecting the ceasefire offer, but nowhere near enough to suggest that real peace is coming in the near future. In terms of Donald Trump, some of the things that he said about Ukraine and Zelensky were absurd, and some of the stuff that's coming out of the MAGA right in America pretty disgusting about Ukraine. However, we have to acknowledge the reality. The reality is we promised the Ukrainians that we would help them win. We didn't actually give them the help that was sufficient for them to win. And when Donald Trump came along, he's found a conflict that was essentially a meat grinder in which both Russian and Ukrainian soldiers were dying for no significant gain, really, for either side. He's, I think, extremely genuine in attempting to bring this to a close. And he's making steps that no one else has. So I think there's absolutely a method to the madness. And I think it's described in his book, actually, where you throw out crazy things that discombobulate everyone, and then you come in and actually solve the problem. So I'm delighted that steps are being made towards peace, but we're a long way away from that outcome.
OK. Man in the blue stripy top.
Obviously, since Trump came into power, we've had a lot of talk about what a resolution for the war looks like and whether or not it will come along. But what actually would make up a peace agreement in this war? Would it be a cessation of violence? Would it be NATO membership? Territory gains, that sort of thing? Because obviously Russia occupies territory at this moment. What would that kind of look like? Do we have any sort of idea?
You over there, and you're in the blue stripe top, you talked about what would peace look like. I mean, Putin is saying, at the moment anyway, the idea of having NATO troops and even European troops in Ukraine is a non-starter. Yeah.
Well, yes. So let me address that. I really want to, because I think it's the most important part of this entire discussion. Can I just say on the credit, if Donald Trump can do a good deal for Ukraine, let's build him a golden statue of him the size of the Statue of Liberty and put it wherever he wants and give him all the credit and bow down and whatever. I don't care who gets the credit or not. If he can do the right peace deal, I think that'll be worth it, honestly. Now, what is the right peace deal? I don't know if you remember, Fiona, the first time I was on this program was a few days after the invasion. And I said at the time, territory is not that important. What matters for Ukraine is long-term security. Yes. And that does mean British, French, European peacekeepers on that border. NATO membership, I think, is out of the question at this point. But there has to be a physical barrier between Ukraine and Russia. Otherwise, this will happen again, and we're going to be sitting here talking about yet another invasion and another risk of nuclear escalation. And by the way, here's another thing. If we as the West sell out Ukraine, you know what's going to happen? Every other country that has powerful enemies like Russia is going to say, well, you guys are not going to protect me. That means we need nuclear weapons, because that's the only way to keep ourselves safe. So if we want to stop the world from becoming more polluted with nuclear weapons, we have to make sure that Ukraine gets a good deal. And if Donald Trump can do that, give him a Nobel Peace Prize.
Which he said he wants, actually, I think. Yeah.
Really?
The man, I think he has. The man there in the glasses in the suit, yes.
Will the abolition of NHS England ultimately improve the performance of our NHS?
My concern is, having cared for my wife now going on 20 years, is the potentiality of too many managers at the top. clearly something needs to happen. It's parallel with what Sir Keir Starmer's talking about in terms of the civil service, and he's already looking at how that can potentially bring about redundancies. My concern is that waiting lists are still increasing just for one issue at the moment, which I can't talk about. I've been told it's going to take 15 weeks just to get your first appointment. So clearly something is still going wrong, and I just feel there's far too many managers and not enough clinicians actually making the decisions.
Well,
So this might be a good thing then, as far as you're concerned.
Sorry?
This might be a good thing then, as far as you're concerned, getting rid of NHS England.
I think that if there's two departments, and it gives me tail-end ideas of the tax office that do everything in triplicate, then we need to look at it.
Questions about the abolition of NHS England. That's the big announcement today. Is it going to make any kind of difference at all?
Well, we'll find out. I think the gentleman who cares for his wife, I think, made exactly the right point, which is we've got a massively bloated, unaffordable public sector that is completely unsustainable. Not only that, it has way more power than it should. I've sat on my show interviewing politician after politician who details in excruciating levels of detail the way that our politicians are hampered by, you know, prevented from doing the things we elect them to do by people who are bureaucrats. I've said only half-jokingly that the reason I believe in an independent nuclear deterrent is that if this carries on, we can use it on Whitehall. And my point is that, you know, you're making me do something that's very natural for me, Fiona, which is defend the Labour government. But when you talk about 9,000 job losses, we don't want to employ as taxpayers 9,000 people who are doing something we don't need them to do. We need to find those people jobs that are actually going to be productive for our economy. And if what they're doing now is preventing things from being done properly and costing a lot of money to the taxpayer, we should be getting rid of them and finding other employment for them. So we are going to have to... Guys, you've got to remember, our debt is 100% of our GDP. We talk about austerity. During that time, our debt went up. We cannot afford to carry on the way that we're going, and we're going to have to make cuts.
Sitting... Oh, right at the back, yeah.
If the proposed benefit cuts are supposed to get people back to work, how do you genuinely ensure that genuinely unwell people are not going to be impoverished?
Can I just ask you, Karen, you've asked this question, is this something you're worried about?
It's not something that I'm particularly worried about personally, but I know that there are so many people who will suffer because they aren't going to be able to get the benefits that they need to be able to survive if they're forced to, if they're not allowed to claim the benefits that they need.
Okay.
There is a choice. You have to make political choices. So can we leave disabled people alone and look to the richest and say, do more, right? That's a political choice.
All right. Konstantin, you want to think?
Well, there's much sense in what you're saying on other things. And look, obviously the story with your mother is something that's familiar to other people, and it's shocking. The reality of this is that there are basically three buckets of people that the sickness, long-term sickness, deals with. You've got people like your mother, you just need the help, they're not going to be able to work, and that's what it is. And they need all the help that we can give them. There's the other group of people who are effectively in a position where they've had some kind of temporary setback in their life. They may not feel well enough to work just now. And what happens to way too many of those people is they get trapped in the system. And one of the reasons is that there are situations for many, many people where it makes no sense for you to go back to work because you're going to actually have less money at the end of it. So we've got to end that because we're leaving millions of people at this point on the scrap heap and doing that. Then also there is a much smaller group of people who are just taking advantage of the system, and we've got to get better at filtering them out as well. So yes, it's very important. We're very clear about who belongs in which bucket, but we cannot leave millions of, including many, many hundreds of thousands of very young people on the scrap heap with no chance to get back into work. And very often it's not because they can't, it's because we don't give them the help they need, because it's easier. Take your money and shut up. That's what we do with them. Instead of giving them CBT, all sorts of job skills, training, etc. That's where we should be putting the money.
That costs more money, though, so that wouldn't lower the budget.
I'm not saying we should lower the budget necessarily. What we should be doing is getting people back into work, because when people are working, they pay taxes, and then we make more money. And that's what we really should be focusing on.
I just want to end that there, because I've got about 7 minutes to fit in a last question. Now, when we get to this, I don't want you thinking, of all the big troubles that are going on in the world, why on earth are you talking about this? The reason we're going for this next question, because every week, quite a few people ask it, and we keep thinking, oh, we can't, sure we're not going to discuss that on Question Time. The moment has come. So, Minesh, where are you? Minesh Patel. Why can't I see? Oh, you're right there. Yeah, off you go.
So, there are potholes everywhere. Why are our roads in such a state of disrepair?
Potholes. That comes up week after week after week after week.
Can the central government do something more with the councils? I cycle, and I notice different counties are cycling seem to deal with their potholes some better than ever. When I cross from Staffordshire into the West Midlands, you know a difference by the amount of potholes.
Konstantin, bet you didn't think you'd be talking about this tonight.
No, I'm glad we're tackling the big subjects. If Vladimir Putin tuned in to find out what this pesky Brits are going on about, he's tuned out by now.
Em and I door knocking, it comes up week after week.
I'm actually only joking because I got a hint that this might be coming up. I spoke to everyone I know and everyone said it was bad. And actually, I had some friends visiting from Ukraine who live in the middle of a war zone. And we were driving, and they looked around and went, there's quite a lot of potholes here, Konstantin, so it's clearly an issue, and it sounds, based on what we've heard tonight, that the way to solve it is to have another election.
So, from Question Time in Wolverhampton, until next week, bye-bye.